Okay, so welcome back. Hi, everyone. Hello, hello. So welcome back after the quick break. Welcome to the next talk. We are delighted to have Laurie Weingart give the next talk. She's a professor of organizational behavior and theory at the Tepper School of Business at CMU. Laurie has served as CMU's interim provost and chief academic officer, and also as senior associate dean education. She has served as director of the Accelerate Leadership Center within the Tepper School. And her research examines collaboration, conflict, and negotiation with a focus on how differences across people help and hinder effective problem solving and innovation. She's the recipient of numerous awards and is an elected fellow of the Academy of Management. She has recently co-authored a book called The No Club. It's a guide for bringing gender equity to the workplace. And we thought this was a perfect topic for all of us at the workshop. So if you haven't learned already, this is going to be really a valuable skill to, I guess, to learn how to say no. Laurie will talk a lot more about it. Copies of the book have been placed outside. So those of you who are interested in getting a copy of this book, you should just look outside on the table. And I will hand over to Laurie right now. I think Laurie has encouraged asking of lots of questions during the talk. So if anybody has a question to ask, just come get this microphone and I think Laurie will be able to hear it. So Laurie, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be there or be there virtually. Oh, now I can see a little bit more of the room. So what I want to talk to you about is something that I both learned from experience as an academic as well as researched. It's about how we manage our workloads. I know all of you are at different stages of early career. And I think these are really important skills. I wish someone would have told me when I started out. So let me tell you a little bit of background about how we came to writing this book and sharing what we learned. Okay, so I'm a card-carrying member of the I Just Can't Say No Club. 12 years ago, Linda, who you see on the slide here, she sent the rest of us an email telling us that she felt like her work life was out of control. She really didn't have enough time to get things done and was being asked to do things that she wanted to say no to, but she struggled doing so. All of us were a little bit more senior in our careers. We were successful, we were overworked, and she figured we probably had the same problem. And because she knew we would say yes, she called us the I Just Can't Say No Club, and she sent us a doodle poll, just saying, okay, tell me your availability and we'll get together. So over the next 10 years, it's actually been 12 now, we met regularly, we shared strategies, and we got better at saying no. But we quickly realized that it wouldn't fix the problem. So we were still inundated with requests to do extra work that wasn't core to our jobs. And while we learned how to manage it, every time we said no, another woman just ended up doing the work that we avoided. And to make it even worse, this didn't seem to be happening to our male colleagues, at least not to the same degree. While we were running around from meeting to meeting, our male colleagues had all these large uninterrupted blocks of time to focus on their research and their teaching. So we really wondered, what was going on here? Like, was it our fault that we just couldn't say no? Or was there some sort of hidden dynamic at work that was weighing us down? So being researchers and academics, we decided to apply our skills and do some research to figure out why women were doing more of this work that doesn't advance their careers. So through our experiences, the experiences of others, and our research and other people's research, we really did figure out what was going on. And we've identified ways that women and their organizations can fix the problem. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. All right, so first we need to kind of name the phenomenon. And so we put a label on it called non-promotable tasks. All right, so a non-promotable task is something that you do that matters to the organization, but doesn't advance your career. Okay, so it's all that those things you do outside of your normal job responsibilities. So let me just give you some examples of what these look like. And then and I'll talk about the characteristics of them. So but before I go on, just think in your own head about things you do on the day-to-day that are important, but don't help your career. And if I could, I don't know if I could hear you if someone were to shout it out, but anyone have one?
Ordering food.
Yes, ordering food for meetings, cleaning up after the meeting, scheduling the meeting, putting on a conference like this one, right? All those things are really important to your profession and to your organization, but they don't help you, or they're good for your team. So here's the top 10 list that we identified in terms of all the things we do that are non-promotable. So these should look familiar. Things like supporting our coworkers, all the things we do to support one another, to back them up. So it might be reviewing their work, covering for them when they can't attend class, helping someone solve a problem. So all those things we do to support coworkers, really important to the organization and to the university. I can talk about universities with this group. Really important to your coworkers, but don't help you advance your own career. All the service work that we do, right? Serving on oversight committees, DAE&I committees, logistical planning committees, in academia, committee work, can be overwhelming. There is the set of things we do to, promote group harmony, help other people resolve conflict, or mentor other people. Really important again. And then there's the basic office housework that we do, like taking notes in meetings, ordering the foods, cleaning up afterward, right? All of these things need to get done. They're important to the organization, but unless they're part of your job, they don't advance your career. So that's what we mean by non-promotable tasks. All right, so there may be other things you do that are non-promotable. And when we step back and look at all this extra work that we were doing, we kind of try to boil them down into their core components. So what we found that was similar across many of these tasks were the following. First, we asked whether the task was instrumental to improving the organization's bottom line. Okay, so what does this mean for academia? Right. So what's the currency? What's important in a university? High quality research and teaching in service of knowledge creation, attracting students and student success, right? So increasing the knowledge base and teaching. So, all right, so so what are the things that you do that are instrumental to advancing those goals, right? So we do our research, we conduct research, we publish research, we teach our courses. Everything else we do is less instrumental, right? Or maybe indirectly instrumental to meeting those bottom lines, like these committees. I was on a committee to plan the design of the business goal. Over 30 years, I've done it 3 times, organizing social events and so on. So the next characteristic is the visibility of the task. So does this task get tracked? Is it monitored? Is it visible? Are your efforts, can they be linked to the output? So if you think about our jobs, right, research productivity, the answer is yes, that would be promotable. Teaching ratings help you, make your teaching visible, but your service, not really, right? It's pretty invisible. You know what you're doing, but most other people do not. The third characteristic is, does the task require your specialized skills, that which you were hired to do? Or can anyone do this job, right? So research and teaching, check, right? Our specialized skills, especially when we're teaching these advanced courses that tap into our expertise. But the other tasks, like ordering food for a meeting that you brought up, doesn't require the skills you're being trained in, as a theoretician. Okay. So when you look at these are the 3 prime characteristics of promotable tasks. Another question you can ask is the task indirectly promotable? So could it help you advance your career indirectly, right? So these are the tasks that allow you to develop new skills or meet new people that will give you connections, right? And I put this in parentheses because it's indirect. It doesn't directly advance your career. It's less promotable in that regard. If you do a little bit of it, like the first time you do it, it's great, right? But it can be a slippery slope. If you stay on this committee for a long period of time, you've already developed those relationships. Staying on for much longer, year after year doesn't necessarily serve you well, becomes less promotable over time. Okay, so that's the idea of what's promotable. So hopefully that clarified to you how to think about your work. And I'll talk more about how to use this information in thinking about your own careers and how you're spending your time. Okay, so that was the first step. The second step was to say, well, for us as a group, was to ask ourselves, is our intuition right that women are doing more of this work than men? So we looked at it in two ways. First, of course, we went to the literature to see what other people have found. And here's an example of one study that's out there. And I'll show you these results in a second, but there were studies across industries, engineering, law, high tech. That's the newest one that's out. This report came out in 2022, looking at women in high tech. So it's by the same kind of set of authors, Williams out of the Center for Work-Life Law and Society. Work-Life Law, that's the central publisher. They do the work. But what we see is that across these different disciplines and jobs, even grocery store workers and TSA agents in airports report that the women are doing more non-promotable work than their male colleagues in the context of their job. So here's results from one study that was based on a survey of engineers. So it was 3,000 engineers reporting on their access to both promotable work and non-promotable work. So what you see here is the dark bar on the far right, that represents the white men. And the bars to the left include women of various ethnicities. And what you see in terms of access to promotable work is that the men report having being more likely to be assigned high-profile tasks or work teams, and they say they believe they have the same access to desirable colleagues as assignments as compared to their colleagues, much more so than do women. And then, when you look at different ethnicities, there's some differences as well, where, for example, the African-American women felt like they had the least access or least desirable assignments. And this has been repeated in other industries as well. When we look at non-promotable work, in this study, they focus specifically on office housework that I defined earlier, like finding a time when everyone can meet or taking notes at meetings, planning office parties, and so on. The women reported having to do much more of this than their male colleagues. All right, so this is, self-report data. It's good data, but we wanted to quantify it. We were wondering, well, how much more time do women spend at doing this work than their male colleagues? So to do that, we had to get the cooperation of an organization, and we were able to work in one organization with a consulting firm. And the great thing about talking to consulting firms is that they keep track of billable hours. Like their employees keep track of where they're spending their time, both billable and non-billable. So they went back into their data across 3 years and categorized the work as promotable and non-promotable, and then compared the total amount of time that their employees were spending, male and female, on this work. So this first graph compares within junior colleagues and within senior colleagues the total amount of time women spent in a year versus men on non-promotable tasks. And what they found is that regardless of seniority level, the women were spending 200 more hours a year on non-promotable tasks as compared to their male colleagues. Like that's a month of extra work. That's a lot of time. And these were things like working on mentoring others, doing community service, all the things that they kept track of. They also collected data on how much time they were spending on promotable work. And what they found was that the junior women, right, so these were the non-partners, newer in their careers, they were spending 250 fewer hours than their male colleagues on their promotable tasks. So this was the billable time. This is the stuff that advances their careers. This is a trade-off, right? So maybe they were doing this to make more room for the NPTs they had to do, or maybe they were given fewer opportunities to do the promotable work. We don't know. But again, that's a month less time spent on career impacting work than the men spent. Right, that's a problem. So think about this in terms of your own work, spending a month less time in the lab or developing theory, whatever, the primary tasks are in writing code than your male colleagues. All right. The senior women was a slightly different story. The median senior woman spent the same amount of time in their promotable tasks as a median senior man. She just worked more hours, right? So she took this extra month of work and put it on top of everything else. So the inequity of the situation was very clear, right? But the question, of course, is why is this happening and what is the impact on women? I'm going to talk about both. All right. So when we looked at these junior consultants, this is a great example of what we call work-work imbalance, right? If we talk about work-family imbalance all the time, we're spending too much time at work, we have less time for our family. Well, here we're spending too much time on our non-promotable tasks that results in less time available to work on our promotable tasks, the things that are important to our careers. And of course, you can imagine all the negative impact it can have on your career, right? It's hard to demonstrate and develop your skills. So your career can slow down, the promotions slow down, the raises slow down. You might not get past your annual review and so on. But it also has personal impact on individuals. We see evidence of a diminished professional identity, right? There's this really interesting study of women in engineering and how, and these were students actually, and they were saddled with all the administrative tasks in their work teams. The men were getting the exciting assignments and the women were kind of backing them up. And they really questioned whether or not engineering was the right field for them. And some decided to leave as a result. It's, of course, emotionally exhausting to have to try to keep up and to try to manage this balance. It can lead to tension with your male colleagues, right? When there's inequities. And then, of course, we see outcomes in terms of dissatisfaction with the work, stress, and turnover. People leave. There's also, of course, negative outcomes when you have work overload. So this was the story of our senior consultants who just worked longer hours. Of course, this is going to spill into your work-family balance. You have less time to spend with others. When you're working all the time. That can be very isolating, right? Instead of having time to go out with your colleagues and socialize, you're staying at the office late. You're working in the lab late. You're in front of your computer when other people are able to take a break. This is psychologically stressful. It can lead to burnout. It can be physically stressful. It can lead to hypertension. Of course, when you're spending all this extra time, it's one thing when you have a month of extra time on work that's advancing your career, you'll see the payoff. But in this case, you're spending a month of extra time doing work that doesn't advance your career and you don't benefit from it. All right. So, bad all around, bad for women. And of course, you can imagine this is bad for organizations as well, because if you want, if organizations want their employees to succeed, holding them back with non-promotable work is going to hold them back from their advancement. And it's very hard to achieve gender equity or improvement in the balance when the women are saddled with this extra work. All right. So why does this happen? All right. So now I'm going to transition a little bit. So the next question is, how does this happen? Like, is it, we thought maybe we just couldn't say no, or is it because women are getting asked more? Well, the answer is all of the above. Right? We found in our research that women tend to be asked more to do non-promotable tasks than their male colleagues. In fact, in our research, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. Women were 50% more likely than men to be asked to do a non-promotable task. 50% more likely to be asked. Okay. We also say yes. We're more likely to say yes when we're asked. Asking is a good strategy because we're more likely to agree. and I'll show you the data, but in our study, 75% of the women said yes when they were asked, when only half the men said yes. And we volunteer more. Women are 50% more likely to volunteer to do a task that would help the group, but would come at a personal cost to themselves. So the question is, what's going on? Like, why is this happening? And what we find in our research, this is the headline, it's because we're expected to. There are these norms and expectations. We expect women to do this work, so we ask them. We have internalized these expectations, so we say yes, and we volunteer. All right, so let me just show you a little bit about the data for this in one study that demonstrates kind of these dynamics. All right. So we ran an experiment where we brought a bunch of people into a lab, men and women, and we wanted to test who volunteers first to do a task that benefits the group, but comes at a cost to the person doing it. So, you think about the situation of you're all in a meeting, someone has to take notes in the meeting and summarize them and distribute the notes afterwards. Everyone benefits from the note taking and the writing up of the report, but it's time consuming for the person who does it. So who's going to volunteer to do it? So in this study, there were mixed sex groups. There were men and women in the room. And for each round, you see there's 10 rounds, they were told they were with a random set, and they were of 3 people, men and women in the room. So they didn't know the exact gender composition for each round. And we wanted to see who would volunteer first to do the task. And what we found was that across all the rounds, women volunteered first about a third of the time. Okay, so that's kind of equitable, right? There's groups of 3. So, each person should volunteer about a third of the time. But men took a different strategy. They volunteered only 20% of the time, or about twice across the 10 rounds. And these differences were statistically significant using whatever test you wanted to use. And men were volunteering less from the very beginning, and this didn't go away over time. So they weren't just waiting to take their turn. This happened round after round after round. So then the next question we had is, well, what's driving this? Is this because women they're nicer, we're more altruistic? And, if that was the case, if it was a personality thing or something about our gender, then you would imagine that these would hold regardless of whatever group we were in. It wouldn't matter. So we ran the same experiment, but this time we did it with same-sex groups. So people came in either all male or all female in terms of how they self-identified. Okay, what we found is that the rates of volunteering changed when people knew they were in groups of all the same sex. We found that the men in the blue lines here, they volunteered more. They increased their rate of volunteering, where the women decreased their rate of volunteering. They looked around the room and they said, oh, it's all women. I don't have to step up first, right? So, the takeaway here is that people look around the room and they adjust their behavior based on the gender of who's in the room and how they expect them to behave. And of course, if these gender differences in volunteering were just related to their preferences to volunteer, the behavior shouldn't change. It should stay the same. So this was a really great clue that this was due to expectations. And we measured individual differences and we controlled for them statistically, and the effect didn't go away. Okay. All right. So the next question we had is, well, if these expectations are so ingrained, it should affect who gets asked to do NPTs. So we ran another study where we asked managers to come in and pick one person to ask to volunteer. Okay, so this is a manager who has to ask someone to take the notes and send them out. So when you looked at this group, how many people you can raise your hand because I can kind of see you. How many people would be more likely to ask the woman than the man? Okay, I've just given you so many clues. Nobody's moving. I see you. Nobody would ask the woman first? Okay, I've also primed you, but what would you naturally do? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Maybe someone would. What we find is that when a group contains one woman and two men, the woman is more likely to get asked than the man. So about 40% of the time the woman was asked, about 30% the men. Okay. So maybe that's because, well, it's just the only woman in the group, so she stood out more. So then the question is, well, will this hold if there are two women in the group and one man? It held. So in this case, the women, just kind of split the difference, and the men got asked even less, only 25% of the time. And what's important to point out is this was being done by women and men. It's not that men, hold this preference. Women and men do. And you know what? This preference is well-founded because, as I mentioned earlier, the women who were asked in the experiment were 75% of them said yes. When the men were asked, only half of them said yes. So it's a good strategy. All right. So hopefully that's convincing that there's something going on here about expectations driving this. And then, of course, the question is, why do we expect? Why do we expect to do women more than this? And there's a lot of reasons. And I'll summarize these quickly because I do want to talk about what we can do to manage ourselves in the situations, right? But we have to understand the reasons why so we have the best strategies. So one is we ask people who we know will say yes. I've just given you evidence of that. There's a lot of evident research that shows that we think we pull up in our minds a prototype or a stereotype of who is the right person to do the work or a good fit. And women are more likely to come to mind than men because, in society, women tend to be in this role of the helper. We do this more at home. Maybe those norms transfer to the workplace. And so we just think of women more easily. Also, practice makes perfect. And if women have historically done this work, we get good at it. And so, we're the kind of the victims of our own success. Of course, men could easily do the work and become just as good at it because it doesn't require the semi-specialized skills that we bring with ourselves to the table. Another reason women get asked to do these non-promotable tasks more is what people call cultural taxation. So I'm sure this is something that you will experience if you haven't, being in a field where women are underrepresented, right? So there's fewer women than men. Let's say there's 20% of the women on the faculty are women. But oftentimes we say, well, we want 50% representation on our committees of women. So the women get oversampled, right? You're going to go to the women more and more often to make sure we have women on every committee. Of course, the problem is there aren't enough women to go around. And so we get taxed as a result of the cultural group that we belong to. And as you can imagine, this is an even bigger problem for women in underrepresented groups. So women of color face this both in terms of their race as well in terms of their gender, and they really get tapped into and overtaxed as a result. And then finally, the last category is what we talk about as benevolent sexism, right? These are people who are really well-intentioned. They want to help us. So they give us opportunities to network and to do special leadership sessions and so on. But it pulls us away from the time we have to do our research. And it inadvertently does more harm than good. Okay, so these are many reasons why this happens. All right, so what's notable about this, again, is it's not because we don't know how to say no. It's because we're being asked to say yes. That's coupled with the fact that we're expected to say yes. So we can't just say no because it could backfire, right? And this is the question we get all the time are what are some strategies we can use to fix the problem for ourselves so that we're still viewed positively in the organization and we can free up our time to balance out our workload. So I'm going to talk about 3 sets of strategies. The first set is all the things you do to, we need to resist the urge to volunteer. And oftentimes we look around the room and say, oh, I'm just going to do it. It'll be easier for me to do it than someone else because I've done it before. But we want to resist that urge. So I'm going to talk about some things you can do to help yourself in that regard. Want to learn how to say no and avoid negative repercussions. And then also think about what NPTs you want to say yes to that actually help you feel good for you and good for your career. So I'll start with the first. What do you do before saying yes? Okay, so the first step is to slow the process down. So instead of that immediate response of happy to, Brenda in our club, she always, whenever anyone asked her to do a non-promotable task, her gut response was to say happy to. I'm the team player, I can help. And it kind of made her feel good. But so the first thing was to break that habit, that she actually wasn't happy to do all this stuff. And she needed to have some time to decide. Linda put in this thing she called it the 24-hour rule, that she would say yes, she'd say no right away, but she'd wait 24 hours before she'd say no. See, let me get back to you, whether it was an email or a phone call or even a request that was made in the hallway. If this request was going to take time, she would take the time to decide. And in that time, you need to to collect information, right? Get the information you need to understand the task and think about who's asking you. Is this someone you can say no to? Is this someone who has, authority over you? And how do you want to approach them given the situation? The next step, after you assess the ask itself, is look at your own time and make a good assessment about what the cost to you will be of saying yes, and not to underestimate it, because there's research saying we tend to underestimate the cost of saying yes, often because we don't consider what we're giving up when we say yes. So what's your implicit no? So for Lisa, it was her family, because she was in work overload. So she actually put a Post-it on her computer that reminded her to think of her kids every time she was asked to review another paper or help another colleague or serve on another committee. That was her implicit no. She'd be saying no to them if she was saying yes to this. Also, think about yourself in the future. If you're asked to do something a month from now, your calendar looks pretty open, but your calendar is going to be just as full then as it is going to be next week. So remember, the future you is going to look a lot like the present you. And do you have time to fit this in? Finally, beware of your triggers. Like for me, my trigger was I felt good about being asked. I felt empowered, like, oh, I have something and someone needs some help and I can help them. And I had to kind of put that in check a little bit. And this was kind of my diva moment. I could feel good about being asked, but I didn't have to actually do the work to feel good. For me, another trigger was I felt guilty about saying no because I wanted to be this team player. I wanted to be the helper. And I had to realize that I was still a team player, even though I couldn't help this other person out. So all these things come into play to help you avoid getting cornered into saying yes. The second set of, and so in the book, which I do hope you'll pick up and grab a copy, we give a lot of practical suggestions about how to do that. The second is how do you say no while avoiding negative repercussions? And this comes, the basic set of suggestions here involve putting limits on what you can do and what you agree to, and negotiating. So the first thing is, if you can find an alternative that solves their problem that doesn't involve you taking on the task, that's great, as long as you're not pushing it onto another woman who's just as busy, right? So trying to find a male colleague who's never done it before, or someone who might benefit from doing the task this time because you've already done it 5 times, or maybe even suggesting someone in another role who might be more appropriate to do this task. As a faculty member, I've organized, helped to do logistics on conferences for the university, for my field, but finding an administrative assistant who could actually learn the task and make it part of their job was good for them and good for me. So putting some conditions on your yes is another. I can do it now this time, but why doesn't Joe shadow me this time and he can pick it up next time? Or ask for additional resources and support, set time limits. I can do this for the next week, but not forever. I can do it this time, but not next time. The work you do doesn't have to be perfect. That's, puts limit on it as well. But, turning this into a negotiation, saying, look, you need help. I need to protect my time. I'm busy. Here's the things I have going on right now. Let's try to find a way to help. Let me help you figure a way to solve your problem, again, without me taking it on. And we have lots of solutions that you can consider. Also, forming a no club and brainstorming solutions that work within your context is a great thing to do. All right, so this is about saying no, responding to requests. And that was the first thing we needed to do. We had to just be able to deal with the barrage of requests we were getting. Then we learned to take a step back and look at our whole portfolio of non-promotable tasks to figure out how we can bring it into line with what our male colleagues were doing through a process of assessment and adjustment. So first, there's a series of questions you can ask yourself in assessing your workload. How do you spend your time on promotable and non-promotable tasks? How do others spend their time, especially your male colleagues? What are the expectations of the organization, of the university, of your department? And once you have a good sense of those factors, then you can start thinking, well, how do you want to spend your time and which NPTs are right for you? All right, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Once you've done this assessment, hopefully with input from more senior colleagues who have a sense of what you should be doing and what's promotable and not promotable, then you can start figuring out what adjustments you can make. What can you let go of? Who can take it on if, to balance out the load, and who's going to help you make the change. All right, so these can be done in conversations, again, with mentors, with your no club, with your department chair, with senior colleagues at this conference. These are good conversations to have in your network to figure out the answers to these questions. So once you figure out what the right load is and what you want to get rid of, and hopefully find some ways to start distributing that more equitably, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, you can look at your NPTs that are left to decide which you want to keep, because of course everybody needs to do some. So let's find the ones that are best for us. And this was my strategy, right? I really focused on non-promotable tasks that I wanted to do and that leveraged my expertise. So if I was going to be on a university committee, it will be one that leveraged my expertise in collaboration and teamwork and on organizational behavior, right? So, and that things that I cared about. So I really use those as filters about, what to sign on to. These were, I tried to choose ones that were good returns on my time, although I wasn't so good at that, but my colleagues were better at it. Things that kind of gave me a mental break, from my, for me, when I was working on my research, very labor intensive, but the payoff takes so long to get a paper published, especially in my field. Some of the administrative work I did in the non-promotable tasks were enjoyable to me because it kind of fit in with my current workload. I was able to do some things that gave me immediate feedback and I knew was having an impact, even like mentoring junior faculty or putting on a conference or whatever it was, organizing something. Some of that was kind of fun because I felt like I was having an immediate impact. All right, so these are things you can do individually to manage your own NPT load. And I really believe that, that's a first step in getting a sense of your own work life. And that's what we did in the club. But after that, we realize, and you'll realize, that the requests keep coming in. And you look at your female colleagues and they'll be in the same situation. So the next question is, well, what can we do? And what can organizations do? And what can universities do and departments do to fix the problem so that we stop receiving these additional requests and feel this pressure to say yes. All right. So as individuals, we can seed change. Think about bottom-up change efforts. We have some agency. And, there's two steps. One is creating awareness, getting people to use the term non-promotable tasks to think about their work in terms of how they should be spending their time. And, recognizing the fact that everybody needs to contribute to beyond their career enhancing work, but the women shouldn't be doing more of it than the men. So, you can talk about the issue in relatable terms, recognize the fact that, look, if the university and department is trying to improve gender equity, this is an important thing to look at. So you're tying it to the important goals of the department. Persistence is key, bringing it up whenever the opportunity arises, and enlisting allies. Your male colleagues who care about this, your department heads in lab, your faculty who care about this, the administration, and so on. So, and also members of other affinity groups that are facing a similar burden. So there's creating awareness. And we find that once people start talking about it, once you start seeing it, it's hard to unsee. And then the second step is, with that information and that knowledge, what can you do? Interrupt the status quo. So if you're in a meeting and you see that one of your female colleagues is being voluntold to take on a non-promotable task, you can interrupt it by saying, hey, wait, Jennifer did it last time. Maybe, Kevin can take it on this time. So, speaking up and advocating, suggesting different ways to hand out the task instead of, when someone says, is there a volunteer? Before anyone can volunteer, speak up and say, we know that volunteers tend to be women. Why don't we just take turns? Or if someone volunteers and they did it last time, say, you know what, you did it last time. Maybe someone else can pick it up this time. So we're basically engaging in whatever power we have to get people to start changing their habits of how this work is taken on. Those of you who are a little bit more senior, start mentoring early career colleagues so that they know which is what's promotable and what's not. Sometimes junior colleagues feel that if they're asked to do something, it must be important. But if you were not effectively mentored, you may not realize that the task is actually non-promotable. So a bunch of ideas we suggest. Okay, well, the goal here, right, is once we've started seeding the change is to get our managers, our senior faculty, our department heads to start thinking about their work units, their labs, their departments, to both change how work is distributed, educating the employees about what's promotable and not, and redesigning and redistributing current NPTs. So doing the things that make sure we have everybody stepping up to the plate to do these tasks. Not saying that everybody has to do everything, right? Like I don't know, like if it's bringing in food for the department meeting, like I don't cook, so it's not going to be me. But maybe someone else does. Like I don't have to do every non-promotable task, but if everyone's sharing an equal load, we'll all be in a better place. And then, of course, we can think about how organizations can fix a problem in terms of more, and this is thinking about our RPT, our reappointment and promotion and tenure processes. What are the expectations for doing non-promotable tasks or service work? And then enforcing standards. So there's a great, anecdote out of the Harvard Kennedy School. That's their School of Public Policy. So when our work first came out a few years ago, they took a look at their requirements for service and actually set a floor in terms of a minimum. And they set up a point system so that if you weren't doing enough service, you actually had to pick up extra work in other domains or and balance things out. So there was some accountability. And then what we suggest is put a cap on it as well, so people aren't doing too much of this work. Providing incentives to do the work. So if someone's doing a lot of service, maybe we give them a reduction in their teaching load. if they're in a research-oriented position, or if they're a teaching faculty, maybe there's some other incentive we can give them. So we're thinking about redesigning jobs, making sure the right tasks are in the right places, providing feedback and tracking how much service people are doing, and so on. So all of these things are the types of solutions that will fix the problem in the long term. So I like talking to groups, organizational leaders as well, to give them the tools to fix the problem. And so as you all go back to your institutions, talk to your department heads, talk to your, whoever you have access to start getting them thinking about this and what they can do to fix the problem. When you're done with the book, pass it on to someone else to read. And because in the end, organizations that fix the problem will improve gender equity. They'll have a better, more supportive culture. They use their workforce more efficiently. People will be more satisfied and engaged. And they'll be a better place to work. They'll be more likely to be able to attract women and retain women. And isn't that what, we're all trying to do at this point in time? So with that, I'm going to stop my comments. I think we still have a good amount of time for Q&A. The book, is available. It's been paid for by the conference, so it's free to you. I believe that's the case. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what we talked about. And so what you'll be able to do is take this with you. And what you're going to see in the book, it's very practical. It's written for you. It's got exercises and, little questions you can answer to help you do your assessment of your work and balance out the load. So I really hope that, you find this to be really useful for you in your careers and the careers of your colleagues as well. So with that, I'll stop talking and turn it over back to you. And I don't hear anything coming out of the room right now, so I don't know if it's muted, but if you want to pass around a microphone but I'm sure you have lots of questions.
Thank you. So I was wondering, you mentioned that you did some experiments where you asked groups of only men to volunteer. In those experiments, do men tend to volunteer very equally, or were there characteristics that made it more or less likely? Like when there's no women in the room, what factors tend to emerge?
Yeah, so in this study, because it was an experimental setting and they didn't know characteristics of the others, some of that was random assignment and washed out. In general, though, we see that people who have a more cooperative tendencies, personality-wise, tend to volunteer more. So if there's some individual differences, that will probably come into play with the men, just like it will with the women. Once you pull gender out of the equation, there are some personality factors. In this situation, there were no status differences among the men. So, but you could imagine in the workplace, you might see people in lower status positions or lower levels of seniority being the ones to do this more so than higher status. So you can imagine those things will come into play.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I mean, this is very close to what I'm currently working on, trying to say no to things. And I'm definitely going to use some of the things that you have said. So one thing that I was wondering that if, so the example that you gave that sometimes maybe a woman is asked to do something, but somebody can say that, okay, give this to Kevin. The problem is, what if Kevin doesn't do it from all his heart, and then you end up the task giver had to take the burden of, okay, this task is not done, now I have to do. So
right.
How do you deal with this decision? Asking from the end that sometimes I also, when I work with PhD students, I guess if there are things that requires more creative things, somehow I tend to pick women, and I feel they'll do it with all their heart, but maybe that's wrong, and I'm just deciding
Yeah, so you're in a perfect position to change the norms, right? So we have to hold men accountable to do this work. That's the bottom line. There's research on feigned incompetence. where men are more likely to feign incompetence than are women to get out of doing this work, or any type of, low status work. The having an explicit conversation about it outside of the task allocation is a great tool, because you can have a conversation with your group that says, with all your graduate students, that say, I've read this book. I'm starting to think more about who's doing what in the group, and I'm realizing that or just, you don't even talk about the past, just the current. I want to make sure that everybody is doing their fair share. So I'm going to start being more intentional about who I ask to do these things. And I want to be clear that, everybody is being held to the same level of expectations to carry the work out. And in your position of authority, by saying that, and then of course, walking the talk and holding the male students accountable. And once they realize they're being held accountable, you'll be in a better place. Now, if, let's say though, this is the first time your male student has ever done this task before, you can give them some support and say, okay, whatever woman has done it in the past will work with you, is available to you to give you tips and pointers, or maybe you two will do it together this time, and next time it'll be your responsibility. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Great. Do you want me to stop sharing my slides? Would that help? Will you see me bigger that way if I stop doing that?
Yes.
Yeah, let me do that. I know all right, good. You see me better now? All right, great. Go ahead.
Hi, Laurie.
I don't know if I'm a big head on the screen now or what, but I'll try to lean
Thank you
back
so much
more.
for your talk. So one of the suggestions you suggested was have like a minimum service requirement for everybody. So this is actually something we tried to make happen in our department. And so a few women who realized that all of the service work just fell on women, fell on people of color, said, what if we had a mandatory service requirement? And so
what happened?
Very, very strong pushback from very vocal male students, a few. At one point, someone replied being like, I don't think serving the community or even improving the world is a necessary part of getting a PhD. So my question is around culture, and it just feels like there's if for the men who are not saying yes feel this culture of oh, I don't need to do it because these women will do it, and I don't know how to shift the culture as women other than it seems like a race to the bottom, because if no one does things, it'll just
Right.
get worse and worse, and there's such resistance. I mean, to be fair, this is a vocal minority of male students in the department.
Yes, absolutely.
They are sure very vocal.
They are very vocal. And I see this since our book came out, by the way, if you read some of the comment boards, you see this vocal minority of men up in arms that we could even suggest that men would ever do this work. But that aside, so a couple things. So one is, it is a race to the bottom, and setting expectations and norms, and basically saying there's a whole range of non-promotable tasks, and not everyone is going to be doing everything. And so, you can choose amongst them something that you find to be most appealing, but this is the foundation of what helps the department run, and everybody has a responsibility. And of course, it has to come from someone in a position of authority, and you have to carry through. So, it ends up walking the talk. Getting, this coming from the men, as not just the women, right? In terms of the male who are not pushing back on this and understand, they have a role to play. There are some men that you're never going to win over. And if you spend all your time dealing with them, nothing will ever happen. So it's a little bit about not giving them the oxygen and focusing on the 80% of people who are going to be behind you and making it happen. And then the 20% will come along or they won't. And if they continue to free ride, then, the leadership has to decide how much they're going to tolerate that. right? And so that's a decision to be made. So it is, culture change has to come from the top. And if there's leadership that allow people to say, not my problem, then it will continue to not be their problem. So so I think that's an issue to be dealt with. It's tough. The culture change is the hardest. Behavioral change is easier. So I always say, start with the behavioral change, and hopefully the hearts will follow. I mean, of course, the other thing, suggestion, which is the radical one, is just that the women go on strike. Like, if we stop doing it, then they'll see, hey, guess what? This stuff does matter. And I wouldn't hold that out off, completely off the table if you want to get a point across.
Yeah, so I actually have 2 questions. My first one is related to this idea, is basically, as you're mentioning that culture change has to come from the top, but I often find that, as I'm sure everyone here knows, that men often occupy those already existing positions of authority. And I guess my question is, where do you imagine we find the leverage necessary in order to actually hold, let's say you have a conversation with your department chair, and in the meeting they go, oh, that's a good idea, I'll think about it, I'll go over it, and then nothing happens, right? Like, so where does the leverage come from?
Right. So this is why the seating change strategies are so important. If you can't engage your department chair, then, there's things you can do and more stealth moves to kind of introduce more equitable distribution. I gave you some examples, but, you do it in the moment, and you start saying no a little bit more and then explain why, right? So and you give tools, you problem solve with them in terms of how to make sure this is equitably distributed. Another thing I'll say is, just because there's a man in a leadership position doesn't mean he doesn't understand this problem and doesn't want to fix the problem. Because I have met more male leaders who this opens their eyes and they really want to fix it. And they try to find ways in their organizational context, in their department, to make sure that they're not contributing to the problem minimally. So look for those people. And there is evidence that, of course, there are people who just care about gender equity. We also find that men who have daughters and wives and partners who are female, and also men of color who have experienced this themselves, they are more likely to be open to gender equity and racial equity types of issues, and are potentially a more natural ally.
And I actually also had one more question on the issue of intersectionality. I know you mentioned earlier some intersectionality with race and ethnicity, and one of the things on my mind is if there's any research or you've seen anything about intersectionality in these sorts of NPTs with both queer people, either gender identity or
yes,
sexuality, and also disability come into my mind.
Really great question. The research isn't there. Like, I just don't know in terms of the data. I can speculate, right? And I can speculate that gay men who present themselves potentially as more effeminate may be stereotyped with more female attributes and therefore expected to do more non-promotable tasks. But that is pure speculation. I have no idea. And I would love for people to study that. What we're really hoping is that this book and our research spurs more research on the drivers of this, the impact it has on organizations, and what we can do to fix it, more broadly speaking. Yeah, so we haven't found the research yet. I don't think it's been done.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question.
Thank you for your talk. I had a question about how you might recommend navigating what appears to me like the differential way in which like men and women are penalized for incompetence, either feigned or for otherwise, with non-promotable tasks, where I feel like, especially in theory or like STEM fields, sometimes incompetence at these tasks is almost taken, if you're a man, as proof of competence in promotable tasks, right? Where it's like, oh, we would never expect this person to, be capable of organizing an event. They're just like one of those brilliant, like geniuses, their head's always in the clouds, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas I feel like when a woman demonstrates the same sort of maybe lack of organizational skills, she's like a, flighty or ditzy. And I feel like there was like, it's like a penalty rather than like proof of some sort. And if you have any suggestions for how to, I don't know, combat this or navigate it, if not combat it.
Yeah, the best thing to do is name the problem. So you call it out, not necessarily in the moment because you don't want to make an enemy, but recognizing that this happens, right? And so if and reminding someone when they say, oh, Seth can't do this or Raj can't do this because, he's the genius scientist. The question is, why not? Now, on the one hand, if he really is the best way he can spend his time is in doing his research, then we want to find ways he can contribute that don't interfere with that. Like, yeah, we want to take research productivity into account, but we need to do the same thing for the women. Like, we have genius women. We don't want to be saddling them. So let's treat all the people in these different strata similarly, right? So and having that conversation. So if you're just as, just as smart, there's no reason why, and successful, there's no reason why you should be doing more of this than your male colleagues. So maybe both of you should be doing less. It's not that he should do more. Maybe like we're going to pay attention to that. So again, taking this into account, that's one thing. And yeah, I mean, it's really hard to change that when, but we do, I had a little thing on the slide that said, do a B+ rather than an A+ job on non-promotable tasks. Like, we need to stop killing ourselves to be perfect in everything we do. And if there's one area where we can lower our standards, it's in non-promotable work. We want to be the best in our research, and our whatever, our teaching. We want to excel. But when it comes to the non-promotable work, you don't have to do it perfectly. And I think sometimes as women, we have, we're so used to having to be the best at anything to be recognized, because especially when you're in a male-dominated field, that we carry that over into everything we do. And you just don't have to do that. And that was a lesson I had to learn, by the way. That was a personal lesson, but it's true.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question about cultural taxation. I guess just like in terms of like short-term solutions, it seems to me like to be one of the hardest things to just like the presence of a woman on a committee is like not something that you can I guess I suppose is it like a question of like training people to like be able to, represent more diverse viewpoints when they're sitting on committees, even if they don't hold those identities, or I guess I was curious about like your short-term solutions for those. I mean, before, we just get more women in the department or whatever.
Yeah, the best way to solve this problem is the leadership approach, and to look at the reason each committee that you're composing, each asset you're making, and if you do need diversity of experience and diversity of background, then to make sure that you're unloading those people with other work. But for individuals, what I always say is when I'm asked, yeah, I'm being recorded, so I have to be careful what I say. But I think I always used to joke that if the only reason I'm being asked to be on a committee is because I have a certain set of physical characteristics, I'll just let you fill in the blanks, and that's it, then the answer is no. Right? But if it's something about my expertise, my perspective, what I bring to the table, then I'll consider it. Right? But if it's just, like I've served on more initiatives over the 30 years, 35 years of my career for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and increasing the representation of women in the academy. That was important to me because it's one of my, it's a concern that I have. I want, it's something I care about. I will say yes to that. I'm not being asked to do it just because I'm a woman, but I'm sure that's part of it. But it's also because I have expertise in organizational behavior, in thinking about gender equity and so on. So that's something. But if you're going to ask me to serve on a committee to, for a curriculum review, because you want equal representation of men and women, I'm like, thanks, but no thanks, not going to happen. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, great.
Yep.
And I know I only have a couple more minutes, I believe. I think we started a little late.
Okay, thank you for your talk. Often when I have these, organizing social events, I feel like when I don't do them, they don't happen. That some people, like, they just don't initiate them, but they benefit from them, they enjoy them, and I benefit from them and I enjoy them. But I find it hard to get this to happen without me being directly involved.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any tips or?
So I think the first question is, have you had a explicit conversation about this?
No.
That's the first step. Just say, hey, I know everybody's really enjoying these gatherings. I love them too. It takes me a lot of time. Would someone be willing to do it next time? Just ask. And you'll be surprised. Someone will step up. And if they say, well, I would love to, but I don't really know, say, well, let's do it together this time. And then you can organize the next one. I find also that asking and saying, hey, look, can we just take turns on this? Can someone else host next time? I'm guessing you'll get someone to step up. Now, maybe another woman. So you could be even more explicit and say, can we take turns and everybody take a turn? So, maybe a woman will pick it up next time, but one of the guys will do it the time after that, and keep track.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any more questions? One last quick question.
Okay.
Hi, yeah. Hi. It's actually kind of more of a quick comment based on the question before last. I heard that at Columbia, like one thing that they do for their DEI stuff is that they have like one kind of committee that's like kind of here's the big overarching like direction we want to go in, and then another committee for like implementing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the implementation committee maybe has a bunch of, like white men on it who, aren't doing enough of this work, versus the people who are kind of setting the agenda, bring those more diverse perspectives of what needs to get done.
Oh, interesting.
But don't do all the work of implementing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd be really interested to see if the implementation that they put forth matches the vision of the, that higher level thinking committee. I think that's great. I mean, the idea again is, think about how the work is distributed and get the right people in doing the right activities. So that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So I think we are out of time. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Laurie.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So glad to be able to join you. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. No, I think they muted at the other end. I just stopped hearing anything.
Thanks very much. Thank you so much for doing this. I think we all learned a lot, and this is a really valuable lesson for all of us. So thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Bye-bye.